The McAllister Ranch had stood for over a century and a half, surviving floods, fires, and 4 generations of stubborn men who refused to sell even when the offers piled high and pretty. I wasn't born here, but I returned after my father passed, leaving behind my architecture firm in Austin and a life of polite meetings and polite lies. This land didn't tolerate lies. It demanded honesty in every step, every fence post, every dawn spent mending what the night had broken. But the world around us had changed. Desert Bloom, once a dusty outpost with 2 diners and a feed store, had been swallowed by developers. Where there had once been open plains and mesquite trees, there were now manicured lawns, vinyl fences, and HOA patrol trucks that moved slower than tumbleweeds, but with twice the menace. The ranch was now surrounded on 3 sides by the newly minted Desert Bloom estates, a sprawling grid of beige homes and bitter retirees who hated everything that wasn't controlled, cataloged, or color-matched. And standing at the top of their pyramid was Karen Langford. She arrived 2 years ago with a moving truck, a glossy white Lexus, and a disdain for imperfection that seemed biblical in scale. Within weeks, she'd clawed her way to the presidency of the HOA board. Within months, she'd declared war on anything that didn't fit her vision of order, including me. She called the ranch an unsightly anachronism. To her, it was an eyesore, a stubborn patch of history refusing to conform. Her first letter arrived in an envelope that reeked of lavender and entitlement. "Dear property owner," it read. "Please be advised that livestock visibility from adjacent roads is in direct violation of Desert Bloom HOA guidelines." I stopped reading and tossed it into the fire pit. The next week, she appeared in person, heels too high for gravel, lips tight with purpose. "Mr. McAllister," she said, arms crossed like a school principal, "I'd appreciate your cooperation. This is a community, not a cattle yard." I met her stare with the slow, measured silence only ranchers and men with nothing left to lose can pull off. "This land's been here long before your community," I said, "and it'll be here long after." Her nostrils flared. "That may not be your decision much longer." I didn't respond. I just turned and walked back to the barn, the steel-toe echo of my boots dismissing her better than words. That was 8 months ago. Since then, she'd tried everything. Code violations for fencing, anonymous complaints about unhealthy animal odors, threats of fines, legal action, and even an attempt to rezone the southern field. She never came alone, always with a clipboard-wielding sidekick or a smug HOA board member nodding like a bobblehead. My lawyer said they were bluffing. "The ranch is technically within the HOA's expanded map, but your property has legal protections. They can't enforce their bylaws here." Try telling that to Karen Langford. One morning, I found a freshly planted notice of violation staked into the pasture gate. The ink was still wet. I pulled it out and flung it into the back of my truck like trash. That evening, 2 HOA board members left flyers in my mailbox, warning me of escalating consequences. But the straw that broke the mule's back wasn't a notice or a letter. It was a drone. I heard it before I saw it, a low whine like a mosquito on steroids. It hovered above the corral where my horses grazed, buzzing erratically, dipping too close for comfort. One of the maras reared up in panic. I grabbed my shotgun, fired into the air, and the drone zipped back over the fence like a guilty kid jumping out of a window. 5 minutes later, Karen called. "I hope you realize discharging a firearm near residential homes is a criminal offense." I hung up. The war wasn't just about fences and zoning anymore.
It was personal now.
She didn't want compliance, she wanted conquest. She wanted to erase the ranch the same way the HOA had erased every wild blade of grass in Desert Bloom. She wanted me gone. But she forgot one thing. I'm a McAllister. And this land doesn't give up its own without a fight. The warnings turned into fines. The fines turned into threats. But I held firm. Every morning, I saddled up and rode the perimeter like my father had, like his father had. It wasn't just habit, it was defiance. Every hoofbeat on that dusty trail was a reminder that the McAllister Ranch didn't kneel for anyone, least of all a woman who thought land could be tamed by paperwork and picket fences. Karen escalated. 2 weeks after the drone incident, I came home from a feed run to find a padlock on my cattle gate and a laminated notice zip-tied to the barbed wire. Immediate cease of agricultural activity. HOA Code 7.3. Livestock prohibited on community-facing acreage. I cut the lock with bolt cutters, walked straight to my truck, and drove to the sheriff's office. "You have every right to remove a trespasser's lock," the deputy said, scratching his beard. "But technically, she hasn't stepped foot on your land. You'd need video proof of interference to press charges." So I installed cameras.
6 of them.
Hidden in fence posts, tree limbs, and birdhouses. I watched her from afar like a rancher tracking a predator near the flock. And then, late one evening, I caught her on footage. She parked her Lexus just beyond the HOA boundary, stepped out with a flashlight and clipboard, and began snapping pictures of my barn. She walked 5 feet past my fence line, aimed the flashlight at the corral, and muttered something I couldn't hear.
Trespassing. Clear as day.
I printed the photos, timestamped the footage, and had my lawyer send her a cease and desist letter. She responded with one of her own, 4 pages of legal-sounding nonsense written in bold font and red ink. According to her, the HOA bylaws had recently been amended to include buffer zones around residential properties. "The McAllister Ranch now falls within that protected corridor," she wrote, "and is subject to HOA oversight." That was a lie. But bold lies have a way of growing legs when no one cuts them off. The next board meeting was held in the clubhouse on a Wednesday evening. I showed up early, cowboy hat in hand and boots still dusty from a day of branding calves. Karen was already at the head of the long faux oak table, surrounded by her usual circle of nodding sycophants. One wore a golf shirt with security coordinator embroidered on the chest. He looked like he'd never stepped foot outside air conditioning. I took a seat in the back, arms folded. When Karen's eyes met mine, her smile barely masked the malice. "Let's address the issue of the non-compliant agricultural operation adjacent to Lot 67, she began, tapping her gavel with more drama than necessary. "The landowner in question has repeatedly ignored HOA directives and is in violation of newly ratified perimeter regulations." She pointed at a crude aerial map projected on the wall. My ranch was circled in red like a crime scene. "We are prepared to issue a formal injunction," she declared, "and, if necessary, pursue court action." "You don't have that kind of power," I said, rising. "Your bylaws are overreaching and unenforceable on my deeded land." Karen's voice turned ice cold. "You'd be surprised what a community can accomplish when it acts in unity." "Unity's got nothing to do with it," I replied. "This is about you wanting to play sheriff on someone else's land." Her nostrils flared. "You're out of order." "I'm not a part of your order," I said, tipping my hat. "That's the problem, isn't it?" I walked out before she could respond. I figured she'd back down after being confronted in public. I was wrong. 2 days later, I was walking my fence line near the southern pasture when I saw her Lexus idling just beyond the gate. I approached, wiping sweat from my brow. She stepped out slowly, as if she'd rehearsed it. Her purse was slung low, heavy on one side. Her eyes didn't blink. "I warned you," she said, voice flat. "I don't answer to you." That's when she pulled the gun.
Small. Black. Shiny.
Not trembling. I froze. Not out of fear, but calculation. One wrong move, and this wouldn't end with legal threats. It'd end with sirens. "You're trespassing," she said, "and threatening the safety of this neighborhood." "You're out of your mind." The fence post camera blinked red. "Recording." "Put the gun down, Karen." She looked toward the lens, her face flickering with sudden, horrified clarity. For 1 second, the HOA queen saw herself as the world would. She holstered the weapon and drove off without another word. That night, I sent the footage to the sheriff. Charges were filed the next morning. But Karen still had the HOA board. And I had a new plan. The sheriff's office charged Karen with brandishing a weapon in a threatening manner. She wasn't arrested, but the warning was formal and on record. For anyone else, that would have been enough to inspire a little humility. But Karen Langford wasn't wired like most people. The incident should have shamed her into silence, or at least a strategic retreat. Instead, she doubled down, claimed I staged the whole thing, told the HOA board I'd provoked her, and that I was using edited video to destroy her reputation. They believed her, or at least pretended to. HOA politics had less to do with truth and more to do with alliances. And Karen had built hers carefully, with cocktail parties, favor swaps, and the promise of property value preservation. These weren't neighbors. They were her private little regime. If I wanted to stop her, I had to hit her where it hurt. In my office at the ranch house, I pored over the HOA's charter and public filings. Most people don't realize HOAs operate like miniature corporations. They have bylaws, officers, budgets, and vulnerabilities. One detail caught my attention. The HOA wasn't owned by the homeowners. The original developer, a company called Sunridge Properties, still held a 51% controlling interest in the HOA board. It was a clause buried deep in the community's founding documents. The residents paid fees and played politics, but Sunridge still pulled the strings, until the day they didn't want it anymore. I called their office. A man named Clark answered. Vice President of Operations. Polite, tired, and vaguely annoyed. I told him who I was and what I wanted. I'm not interested in a lawsuit, I said, but I am interested in purchasing or controlling stake. He laughed. That community's a thorn in our side. You want it, make an offer. The number I quoted could have bought me a second ranch, but I'd seen the footage of Karen leveling a pistol at me with dead eyes. This wasn't just a land dispute. It was a matter of principle. We closed the deal in under 2 weeks. Just like that, I owned the HOA. The ink had barely dried when I called a special meeting. Karen tried to cancel it, claimed the board hadn't authorized it. But the bylaws gave me full rights as majority owner to call and conduct a vote. The clubhouse was packed. Word had spread fast. Homeowners who hadn't attended a single meeting all year were now lining the walls, waiting to see what would unfold. I walked to the podium in my boots and flannel, carrying a manila folder under my arm. Karen was already there, clinging to her presidency with white-knuckled desperation. This is illegal, she hissed. You're not even a resident. I held up the transfer documents. I don't have to be. I'm the legal majority owner of the HOA. And as of this moment, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. The room murmured. Karen's eyes darted to her allies, some of whom suddenly seemed very interested in their shoes. This is a hijacking, she barked. A hostile takeover. I opened the folder and placed copies of the gun footage on the table. One for every board member. This is what your president did to a private citizen on private land, I said, voice steady. And this is who you're defending. A long silence followed. Then one board member raised his hand. I vote no confidence. Another followed. And another. Karen stood frozen, mouth slightly open, watching her empire collapse one hand raise at a time. It was over in 10 minutes. By the end of the night, Karen Langford had been officially removed from her position, stripped of voting rights, and barred from serving on the HOA board ever again. She stormed out of the clubhouse, her heels clicking like gunshots against the tile floor. But I wasn't finished. I'm not here to ruin this community, I told the room. I'm here to end the nonsense. Starting today, the HOA is under new management. No more intimidation. No more illegal zoning threats. And no more treating the McAllister Ranch like a blight. That land is history. And it's staying put. The room erupted in applause. For the first time in months, I felt the tide shift. But Karen wasn't gone yet. And I had one last move to make. For a few weeks, the neighborhood held its breath. Karen disappeared from public view, but her influence lingered like the smell of scorched oil after an engine fire. Some of her allies tried to mount a defense, accusing me of pulling corporate strings to silence a concerned citizen. But they were defending a ghost. Karen had vanished from the boardroom, but not from the ranch's perimeter. I spotted her car parked down the road, more than once. She didn't come onto my land again. She wouldn't dare after what happened, but her presence was a warning, like a snake coiled in tall grass. So, I didn't wait. I used the power she once abused and turned it against her. With majority control over the HOA, I had access to every record, every complaint she ever filed, every misuse of funds, every personal favor masked as community policy. And what I found was damning. Karen had used HOA funds to install a surveillance system around her house, equipment that exceeded budget approvals and violated privacy guidelines. She had written checks for landscaping she never ordered and billed the HOA for private legal consultations under the guise of governance training. In total, over $18,000 of misappropriated dues. I compiled a report and submitted it to the county. Then I took it a step further. HOA bylaws allowed for resident violations to be reviewed and, if egregious, enforced by fines or, in rare cases, property liens. With unanimous board support, her old allies now silent as stones, I served Karen Langford with a formal violation packet, 12 citations, 1 notice of legal audit, and a demand for repayment in full. She responded with fury, threatened lawsuits, called me a tyrant in a tirade she posted across local Facebook groups. But screenshots don't sway judges, and tantrums don't erase paper trails. She refused to pay. So I filed the lien. It was poetic, really. The woman who once threatened me with HOA fines and bogus bylaws now had her home under legal siege by the very system she weaponized. Her for sale sign went up within days. Quiet. No open house. No goodbye. She was gone in under a month. The day the moving truck pulled away, I stood at the edge of my ranch in silence, watching. Not with glee, not even with relief, just a quiet sense of balance restored. The land was still here. The wind still blew through the cottonwoods like it always had. And the ranch, that old, stubborn, sacred patch of earth, had weathered one more storm. But the story didn't end with Karen's departure. In the months that followed, the HOA saw a transformation. We rewrote the bylaws, stripped them of Karen's restrictive overreach. Agricultural zones were honored, not harassed. Residents actually talked to one another instead of tattling through anonymous forms. We even held a community barbecue right at the border of my ranch. I brought my cattle dogs and smoked brisket. A few folks brought cornbread. And no one mentioned property values. Just laughter. Just shared space. Just neighbors. One of the new board members, a retired teacher named Eileen, came up to me as the sun started dipping. You know, she said, a lot of people thought you were going to raise the place. Take over. Go full warlord. I smiled. I just wanted to be left alone. She nodded. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never wanted the job. The sky turned gold behind her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the quiet settle deep in my bones. That night, back at the ranch, I walked out to the porch with a cup of coffee and looked toward the HOA homes in the distance. Porch lights twinkled like low stars. No drones, no trucks, no gate padlocks. Just land. And legacy. And a lesson etched into the soil itself. When you stand your ground with patience and purpose, even the loudest tyrants eventually run out of ammo.